Imagine having two modes of thinking that shape every decision, belief, and perception. In Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman introduces us to the mind's two systems. System 1, which is fast, intuitive, and emotional, and System 2, which is slow, deliberate, and logical. Together, these systems guide how we make choices and understand the world, often in surprisingly flawed ways. Based on decades of research and Nobel Prize-winning insights, Kahneman's groundbreaking work reveals how these systems interact, how they influence us, and why we're often unaware of the biases that shape our lives. Part 1. Two Systems of Thinking. In this first section, Kahneman breaks down the distinct mechanics of our mind's two systems, each serving a different purpose in how we approach and interpret the world around us. System 1 is the mind's automatic, quick response mode. It operates with little conscious effort, relying on instinct, intuition, and learned patterns. It's the reason we can read emotions on a person's face or recognize a familiar face in a crowd instantly. On the other hand, System 2 is the mind's analytical workhorse. It steps in for complex, unfamiliar, or risky tasks requiring concentration, logic, and deliberation. System 2 is what kicks in when you're solving a difficult math problem or analyzing a complex situation. Together, these systems allow us to function efficiently, saving mental energy when quick decisions are needed and reserving resources for more intensive cognitive tasks. However, System 1's speed and automatic responses come at a price. It's error-prone and can lead us astray. This system, driven by past experiences and ingrained shortcuts, often draws conclusions quickly based on limited information, creating cognitive biases. For example, consider the jumping to conclusions error. When System 1 sees part of a picture, it instantly fills in the blanks, assuming it knows the whole story. This is why we're quick to judge situations or people based on initial impressions. In one experiment Kahneman shares, participants were shown images of people's faces expressing strong emotions, like anger or happiness. Without any context, participants immediately ascribed reasons for the emotions, assuming someone was angry because they were insulted or happy because they received good news. System 1 used past experiences and stereotypes to interpret limited information, ignoring any deeper or alternative explanations. System 2, in contrast, is more accurate and rational but slower and requires effort to engage. It analyzes details and considers context, making fewer mistakes by processing information deliberately. However, this effort is why it's often lazy. It's easier for our minds to rely on System 1 unless something forces us to engage System 2. For example, in Kahneman's famous bat and ball experiment, participants were asked, a bat and a ball together cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Most people intuitively answer 10 cents, an answer from System 1's quick assessment. But System 2, when carefully engaged, reveals that the correct answer is 5 cents. Because if the ball is 10 cents, the bat would be $1.10, totaling $1.20. System 2's accuracy becomes clearer in scenarios that involve detailed reasoning and attention to logic, as in another experiment with the Linda problem. Participants were given a description of Linda, who was said to be deeply concerned with social justice and active in feminist movements. Then they were asked if it was more likely that Linda was a bank teller or a bank teller and an active feminist. Many chose the second option, assuming System 1's storytelling tendency was accurate. System 2, however, would recognize the logical flaw. It's statistically more probable for her to be a bank teller alone than both a bank teller and an active feminist. This experiment showcases how System 2 helps us resist instinctive but flawed reasoning, giving us a more logical, probabilistic view of reality. Part 2. Heuristics and Biases. In Part 2, Kahneman dives deeply into the cognitive shortcuts, known as heuristics, that System 1 uses to make quick judgments. While these heuristics can help us navigate complex situations efficiently, they also introduce biases that distort our judgment. Through a series of experiments, Kahneman and other researchers expose the hidden workings of these biases, demonstrating how they shape our decisions in ways we often don't realize. Number 1. The anchoring effect. The anchoring effect occurs when we rely too heavily on the first piece of information, the anchor given to us, which can skew subsequent judgments. In one experiment, participants were asked to estimate the number of African nations in the United Nations. Before guessing, a random number was spun on a wheel. Participants exposed to a high number on the wheel guessed higher, while those exposed to a low number guessed lower, illustrating that initial numbers, even if irrelevant, could anchor perceptions. Number 2, the availability heuristic. The availability heuristic involves judging the likelihood of events based on how easily examples come to mind. If something is easily recalled, we assume it's more common. For instance, people often overestimate the frequency of plane crashes or shark attacks because they are vivid, memorable events frequently highlighted in media. Kahneman's studies show that availability can lead us to misjudge risks. We're more fearful of dramatic, memorable events than mundane but statistically dangerous ones, like car accidents. Number 3, the representativeness heuristic. The representativeness heuristic leads us to categorize events or people based on how much they resemble an existing stereotype. In the classic Linda problem experiment, participants were given a description of Linda as an outspoken feminist and asked if she was more likely to be a bank teller or a feminist bank teller. Even though probability favors her simply being a bank teller, many participants selected the latter option due to the description matching their stereotype of a feminist, revealing how easily we confuse similarity with probability. Number 4, the halo effect. The halo effect describes our tendency to let one positive characteristic of a person or object shape our overall impression. For example, if someone is attractive or charismatic, we may unconsciously assume they're also competent, trustworthy, or intelligent. Kahneman illustrated this bias in an experiment where students rated professors' performances more favorably if the professors had a pleasant appearance or a warm demeanor. Number 5, substitution. Substitution occurs when we replace a difficult question with an easier one to answer without realizing it. For example, instead of evaluating, "How happy are you with your life overall?" we might answer, "How happy am I right now?" Kahneman's research found that people unconsciously replace complex questions with simpler, often irrelevant ones, leading to answers that don't accurately reflect their intended response. Number 6, optimism and overconfidence. Bias. Optimism bias leads us to overestimate positive outcomes and underestimate negative ones. Kahneman highlights this bias in the context of business, where entrepreneurs often underestimate risks and overestimate their chances of success. In one study, 80% of small business owners believed they had a 70% chance of success, even though the actual success rate was significantly lower. Overconfidence in personal abilities often blinds us to risks and real probabilities. Number 7, the planning fallacy. This bias describes our tendency to underestimate the time, costs, and risks of future actions while overestimating the benefits. Kahneman studied this bias in the context of public works projects, which often exceed budgets and timelines. An example is the Sydney Opera House, initially projected to cost $7 million and finish in 1963, but ultimately costing $102 million and completed in 1973. This bias results from our tendency to focus on ideal scenarios rather than realistic obstacles. Number 8, the hindsight bias. The hindsight bias makes past events seem more predictable than they were. After an event occurs, we often convince ourselves that we knew it all along, even if we had no way of predicting it. Kahneman observed this bias in a study where participants read the details of historical events with outcomes omitted. When asked to predict outcomes, participants expressed more certainty than was justified, reflecting how outcomes reshape our perception of the past. Number 9, loss aversion. Loss aversion describes our tendency to prefer avoiding losses over acquiring gains. Kahneman and his colleague Amos Tversky demonstrated this bias in experiments where participants were more likely to reject a gamble with a 50-50 chance of gaining $100 or losing $50. The potential for the loss felt more painful than the prospect of an equal gain, revealing how strongly we avoid loss even when the odds are favorable. This bias explains why people tend to cling to failing investments or prefer safer options over risky, high-reward alternatives. By examining these heuristics and biases, Kahneman reveals the subtle yet powerful ways they guide our decisions and perceptions. Part 2 provides a toolkit for recognizing these biases in our everyday lives, encouraging readers to question instinctive judgments and apply greater scrutiny in situations where precision matters. Part 3. Overconfidence and errors of prediction. This section examines the pitfalls of overconfidence and the persistent human tendency to overestimate our knowledge, skills, and control over events. Kahneman argues that overconfidence is a major source of poor decision-making, especially in fields requiring expertise, such as finance, business, and personal investments. He shows that experts, despite years of experience, often fall prey to an inflated sense of accuracy in their predictions, and their forecasts are frequently no better than random guesses. One striking example Kahneman presents is the planning fallacy, where people systematically underestimate the time, resources, and effort needed to complete a task. Large-scale projects, from infrastructure construction to corporate launches, frequently go over budget and behind schedule due to this bias. Kahneman explains that optimism bias fuels this fallacy, as System 1 tends to simplify complex projects into manageable steps, often ignoring potential obstacles. This bias is seen in ambitious public projects like the Denver International Airport and Boston's Big Dig, which experience massive delays and budget overruns. Kahneman emphasizes the importance of taking the outside view, a strategy where individuals examine their predictions against similar past projects rather than their idealized plans. To counteract overconfidence, Kahneman also suggests using pre-mortems in project planning, imagining that a project has already failed and identifying reasons why. This mental exercise encourages team members to consider potential pitfalls and setbacks in advance, fostering a more balanced, System 2-oriented approach to planning and decision-making. Ultimately, he cautions that overconfidence can lead to costly mistakes, and cultivating awareness of our limitations is key to making better, more informed choices. Part 4. Choices and Loss Aversion. In Part 4, Kahneman examines how people evaluate choices and respond to gains, losses, and risks. Central to this section is prospect theory, which challenges traditional economic models that assume people act rationally in their self-interest. Kahneman and Tversky's research demonstrates that individuals weigh losses more heavily than equivalent gains, a principle known as loss aversion. In a series of experiments, Kahneman found that losing $100 feels significantly worse than the pleasure of gaining the same amount. This intense aversion to loss impacts daily decisions, such as avoiding necessary expenses or refusing to part with assets in declining markets. Kahneman explores framing effects, where the way choices are presented impacts decision-making. In a health-related experiment, participants preferred a treatment option with a 90% survival rate over one with a 10% mortality rate, even though both descriptions refer to the same outcome. This reframing changes people's emotional responses, making them more likely to choose the positively framed option. In real-world scenarios, this effect shows up in marketing, legal arguments, and public health communications, influencing consumer choices and social behaviors based on phrasing alone. The concept of the endowment effect also illustrates loss aversion, where people assign a higher value to objects simply because they own them. Kahneman conducted experiments where participants given a mug were unwilling to sell it for a price others would not pay. Ownership creates an attachment that inflates perceived worth, driving many to overvalue items or investments and making it difficult for people to part with them, even when holding on is disadvantageous. Further expanding on risk, Kahneman examines the certainty effect and possibility effect, which influence how we assess probability. In a series of experiments, he showed that people overvalue certain outcomes and undervalue probabilities. For example, given the option between a guaranteed gain of $500 or a 50% chance to win $1,000, most chose the sure gain, even though the expected values are identical. However, when faced with a 1% chance of a major loss, people disproportionately prioritize avoiding low-risk outcomes over moderate ones, revealing an innate bias towards certainty and fear of unlikely but severe events. Kahneman also discusses mental accounting, where people compartmentalize money based on arbitrary categories, affecting financial decisions. In experiments, participants were more willing to spend a bonus differently than a paycheck, though both are income. This mental ledger leads people to spend irrationally by categorizing funds as extra or windfall, as opposed to being integrated into the overall budget, which affects savings, spending, and investment strategies. In his exploration of the sunk cost fallacy, Kahneman reveals why people continue with failing projects or investments due to past investments of time, money, or effort. For instance, if someone buys a non-refundable ticket but then gets sick, they may still attend to not waste the money, even though doing so doesn't recoup the loss and can worsen the situation. This fallacy drives poor decisions in both personal finances and business, illustrating how cognitive biases make it difficult to abandon previous commitments. Lastly, the concept of regret aversion highlights people's tendency to avoid decisions they may regret. Kahneman studies found that people are often more comfortable sticking with default options or avoiding action because potential regret from making an active choice looms large. This aversion to regret contributes to inertia in decision-making, making people hesitant to take bold or innovative steps due to fear of negative outcomes. Together, these insights provide a comprehensive look at how we manage risks, weigh options, and often make irrational choices due to ingrained biases and emotional responses. Part 5. Two Selves, the Experiencing and Remembering Selves. In the final section, Kahneman introduces a powerful concept: the difference between our experiencing self and our remembering self. The experiencing self lives in the moment, while the remembering self reviews past experiences and defines how we feel about them. Interestingly, the remembering self often overrides the experiencing self, meaning our memories, not the experiences themselves, shape our overall happiness. One famous experiment shows how this works. Kahneman asked participants to rate their pain during a medical procedure, with some experiencing short bursts of intense pain, while others endured a longer but milder discomfort. Surprisingly, the participants rated the longer, less intense experience as preferable. The remembering self forgave the discomfort when the ending was less intense, which Kahneman calls the peak-end rule. This insight has profound implications, suggesting that we can shape happiness not only by having positive experiences, but also by ending experiences on a positive note. Kahneman further illustrates the power of the remembering self with another study on vacations, showing that people often prioritize memorable experiences over those that are purely pleasurable at the moment. For instance, travelers might endure long hikes or strenuous activities because these events will stand out in memory, even if they were not necessarily enjoyable while happening. This points to the duration neglect effect, where the length of an experience is overshadowed by its peak moments and the way it ends. As a result, memories of events become skewed, with our remembering self focusing more on intensity and conclusion rather than on the overall experience. This explains why we may recall some periods of our lives, like a challenging job or a difficult journey, with nostalgia, even if they were difficult at the time. The implications of this dual self theory extend to how we pursue happiness and satisfaction in life. Kahneman's findings suggest that by focusing on creating peak positive moments and ending experiences well, we can engineer happier memories that the remembering self will carry forward. This has practical applications in fields such as healthcare, where a procedure might end with a few moments of relative comfort to improve the patient's retrospective view. It's also relevant in personal relationships, where ending interactions on a positive note, no matter how mundane or routine the experience, can help build lasting satisfaction. Essentially, understanding this divide between the experiencing and remembering selves allows us to cultivate long-term happiness by not just pursuing enjoyable experiences, but consciously shaping the memories we will carry with us. In conclusion, Kahneman's thinking, Fast and Slow, offers a transformative look at how our minds work and how we make decisions, often unconsciously. By understanding System 1 and System 2, along with the biases and errors that influence us, we gain insights into ourselves, improving both our decision-making and awareness of human psychology. Ultimately, Kahneman's work reminds us that true wisdom lies in acknowledging our limitations and embracing strategies to counteract our biases. enabling us to navigate life's complexities more thoughtfully and successfully. Thank you so much for listening and joining us. If you enjoyed the audiobook, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more book summaries that help you expand your mind. Drop a comment below to let us know which book you'd like us to explore next, and we'll consider it for our upcoming episodes. We look forward to bringing you more valuable content right here on Page by Page. Until next time, keep learning and growing.